Hey guys, and welcome to the rendering portion of the Blender render engine. This is going to be a real quick overview of how to set up the render settings for your Blender render scene. It's about the same as the Cycles stuff, except it doesn't have samples, which is really nice because that's one less setting to worry about. The resolution is going to be the same if we just go ahead and look at these settings here. I'm going to go over back to the default workspace just so we have a better idea of the familiarity of the scene. But right here we have the resolution, which is of course should be at 100%. Make sure that's turned on. 24 FPS as usual. Anti-aliasing should be turned on. You can turn on sampled motion blur, but that will slow down your render quite a bit, so I don't recommend it for now. But overall, everything should be about the same. You don't have to worry about most of these things up until output, which again is going to be where your file outputs to. So we're going to go ahead and change that to something appropriate, like for the other one we went to renders, test render 012, because I mistyped 01, but we're just going to do test render 02 for our second folder here for the Blender render version. And again, we can change that to a relative path by clicking that instead. So we have that. Pretty simple, pretty easy. Actually, I think I should be going in here. There we go. Now we do relative path. Perfect. So with that, we have the PNG here. With RGBA. I'm going to keep it at RGB, just like last time I talked about having the sky box already in there, so we don't really need transparency, so might as well save on a little bit of file size just to make sure that is nice and clean and opaque, because that's what we want. If you ever do want to add transparency to your output, then of course you want to do RGBA just in case. So anyway, for our particular scene we don't need it. Now once we have that, we're going to go into the camera settings. And I'm also going to teach you how to do depth of field in Blender render. It's very different than Cycles because it doesn't have it in the scene itself. You're going to have to do a post effect where you composite it in Blender with a node in the compositing nodes, which I'll show you in just a second. But before we do that, I want to go ahead and set up the focus point, which if you guys remember is exactly the same thing in Cycles. You guys may not have watched that tutorial. I'll stop assuming that you did. But ultimately, it's going to be using this focus option here. This is an object that you can use to focus on. And you want to turn on limits just so you can kind of see where it's supposed to be. So in case you guys didn't see it last time, this yellow cross is going to be where you're going to be focusing on. That's the distance from the camera. And we're going to use the focus to create an empty here real quick. Shift A, empty. I like to use sphere. Bring it around here. I'm going to name this DOF right here. DOF. There we go. And then select this guy. Wait for it. There we go. And I'm just going to type in DOF because I know what it's called. And as you can see, it goes directly to the DOF empty. And that's the same distance that we want to focus on. So right there, we have that ready. We have it good to go. But when we actually press F12, you're going to notice that it doesn't actually render out with any kind of blurriness or defocus or anything like that. We're going to have to do it in the compositor, which I'll show you in just a second as soon as this finishes rendering. Okay, so as you guys can see, this is a very, very clear and focused image everywhere in the scene. As you guys know, with depth of field, you want to have a blurry background or a blurry foreground and have the subject to only be clear. That way you kind of draw the viewer's attention to a particular subject or focal point. So what we want to do is we want to make sure that actually works. Now we just made sure that the focus is at least focused on a certain depth or distance from the camera, which is all we need to start out with. And then I'm going to go ahead and hit Control left arrow, and that will bring us to the compositing workspace. And from here, we want to click Use Nodes with the middle, this photograph section icon clicked, toggled on, so that we actually are in the correct space within the node editor. And we're going to go ahead and click Use Nodes, and that should automatically create a render layer and composite or an output node for you. If it doesn't, then you can simply create it by hitting Shift A and then Input, Render Layers, bring that in, it's the same thing. And then output composite. Those are the same thing. So anyway, the node editor is a very intimidating piece of technology that is actually really, really helpful and really intuitive once you get to know it. So don't get too scared by it, but all we want to do is add a defocus node between these two nodes here. And so I'm going to go to Shift A, go to Filter, go to Defocus, and you'll be able to just kind of drop it. If it highlights the line, that means it's going to insert between the two and connect them automatically. And then you're just going to take the depth here from the render layer node, bring it into the Z input here, and then you're going to check Use Z buffer, uncheck preview, and then I recommend changing f-stop to something like, I don't know, 60 or something like that. 128 is just 100% clear. So I'm also going to go ahead and hit Control Shift left click, and that will give me a viewer node. and then I'm going to check backdrop. This will basically allow me to sort of see our render. I'm going to hit shift space to zoom in, and as you can see here, we can see the render of our last render, and I'm going to double check exactly why there is no depth of field here. Let's bring this down to 1 or something drastic like that. There we go. As you can see, it does indeed have the correct value. So I just wanted to make sure. It looks like our f-stop just wasn't small enough. So this is a little bit too small, obviously. I just wanted to check. So we're going to bring it up to like 20 or something like that. And there we go. You have a very slightly, subtly blurry background there. You see the flowers there are kind of blurred. And the foreground here is a little bit blurred as well. So that's a nice amount of balance there, I think. We can bring it down just a little bit more. If you want to accentuate that, that depth of field there, you can. And so that is a post effect. Now, ultimately, after all this, what you want to do is after you set up everything here that you want to, the lighting is good, the render settings are good, you're at 100% resolution, all that stuff, you're ready to go. So all you have to do from here is hit Control F12, and it will start rendering your entire animation. So you're actually going to have an animation output with each image saving out as a separate image, a separate PNG file, I should say, in the folder that you specified and with the file name that you specified. Let me double check if I actually have a file name here for mine. I don't think I do. I just have a folder. There we go. So because I only have a folder, I believe it was going to save it as just image.png. So we don't want to do that. We want to actually give it a file name. So I'm just going to go and say, let's say Blender, no, I'm going to say Minecraft Blender render underscore v001 or version 1, and add another underscore after that because it will add on a frame number for each image so that it doesn't overwrite its own renders, and then it will iterate through every single frame. And I'll go ahead and shift space into this UV editor, which has the render result here, and it will gradually create more and more frames until it's done. This is the same thing as it is in Cycles. It's the exact same process, but I just wanted to go over it here again as well. And so by the time you finish rendering every single frame, you will have a string of, in my case, 30 frames, 30 PNG files that we will then import into the video sequence editor in Blender to stitch it together into an MP4 or an MOV or whatever you feel is the correct file type for you. So once you have it in your sequence editor, you can actually give it sound as well. It does allow you to import sound and add sound, which we're going to do because that's a very important part of Minecraft animations as well. And then from there, you'll be able to render everything out with a codec for audio as well to bring out your MP4, your finalized MP4, and ready to upload to YouTube. So that will be the rest of our tutorial videos in this workshop, and I hope you guys learned something from this one, and I'll see you guys in the next one.